This is Jackie Hauser of Flexner Hauser Injury Law. Welcome to our podcast, Laughter in the Law,
where we talk about the law with a lighthearted twist.
Hey, this is Jackie Hauser, owner of Flexner Hauser Injury Law. We're here for part 2 of There's Something in the Water, talking about the Camp Lejeune Justice Act. I've got my office manager, Diane Belmont, here with me.
Hello.
For Laughter in the Law. I guess she had to get to the laughter part because this is a pretty dry and serious subject.
Whew, yes it is.
Yeah. So we talked last time about the PACT Act of 2022, about the huge paradigm shift in the law, how the U.S. government accepted presumptions about the illnesses being related to certain service members' exposure to burn pits, to their service at Camp Lejeune, to their service in the Gulf War and Southwest Asia, and the Vietnam era service. Today, we're going to focus on the Camp Lejeune Justice Act and just answer some basic questions about that. If you start Googling it, once you get past all the ads, there is some very good information out there. So there's some good articles on it. We've actually written a couple of articles, very brief, kind of coincide with our podcast here. But we found some really good information. And if it's not in the show notes, just let us know and we'll be happy to share it. But I think the most important thing about this Camp Lejeune Justice Act, which I wanted to know whenever I first heard about it, was how the heck did this happen?
I think a lot of people are saying that.
Right.
Yeah. Especially whenever you look at specifically how do you qualify? How do you know whether you or have been affected? Because it's just, okay, so whenever I was reading up on this, what I thought was really significant is what sets the Camp Lejeune Justice Act apart from the provisions that are made for those that were part of Agent Orange or the burn pits in Iraq. And one thing is the length of time, over 30 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's from 1953 until 1987. If you served for 30 consecutive days at Camp Lejeune or lived on Camp Lejeune for 30 consecutive days within those 35 years, that counts. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's crazy. And then the expansion of the reach. I mean, it's not just veterans. It's military contractors. It's civil servants. It's the dependents, family members. There even was a description of you could even be in utero at Camp Lejeune and be affected. I mean, that's just crazy to think about. And then the means of the exposure, like with Agent Orange and with the burn pits in Iraq, those definitely were toxins that were inhaled, whereas with Camp Lejeune, it was ingested. And there's an estimation with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that as many as 1 million military members, civilian staff, and their families have been exposed over those 35 years. That's just crazy to think about.
Yeah. So, if you think about it, though, Camp Lejeune was a new base. It was established in the 40s. And so in 53, it was still a pretty new base. And at that time, it housed 2 U.S. Navy commands and 6 Marine Corps commands, including our infantry, our intelligence, our artillery, our amphibious units, the reconnaissance units. It's 233 square miles of base. It's huge. It's a huge installation in North Carolina. And so, and if you think about it, if you've never been on a military base, and especially during that time frame, military bases were self-contained. You could do everything there. They were little cities, little towns. You went to the grocery store there. You got your hair cut there. You went to the doctor there and the emergency room there. You played ball on the ball field there. You went to school there sometimes. Most Army bases, and including this Marine base at Camp Lejeune, had daycares, had schools on base. All of those people, those children, those kids at the daycare, those folks who came in and just worked on post and left at the end of the day. All of those people could be affected. So yeah, I can see where it could be more than 1 million people for 35 years.
Yeah. It wasn't until 1982 that they even discovered that there was contamination. And where they found that contamination, the concentrations of those toxins were ranging from anywhere from 340 to 2,400 times the safe level of exposure. That's just mind-boggling to think about those high concentrations that were in the water. And the specific water wells that were contaminated, they served the barracks, family housing, daycares, schools, administrative buildings, industrial areas, and the base hospital.
The contaminants that they found in here, which I can't pronounce and you've refused to try, but we're just going to abbreviate them. They're known as PCE and TCE. And if you do some research, you'll find out that those toxic chemicals are what you will find in spot removers, paint removers, polishes, degreasers, mold removers. Those things are what was being ingested. Public should not be ingesting those at all, and they certainly shouldn't be ingesting them at 340 to 2,400 times their safe exposure level to humans.
Yeah. Yeah, so they discover these high levels of toxins and then have to do further investigations to figure out where it came from to begin with. And so they found 3 primary sources. One was the on-base divisions using harsh chemicals to clean their military gear. That was one primary source. Another one was that they had underground fuel tanks on base, and they had leaked an estimated 800,000 gallons of fuel into the ground, which obviously reached the water table. And then the third primary source was the way the waste was disposed of, the waste disposal practices of a nearby off-base dry cleaning facility. And I think because of all of that, they were able to then timeline it back all the way to the 1953. I believe I read somewhere, don't quote me on this, but the dry cleaning facility opened up shortly around that time in 1953. It may have been like a couple years before. So anyway, just crazy to think about. Those 3 major sources were what was just bombarding these water tanks,
right,
and contaminating the water for decades.
Right.
So here's the thing that really just boggles my mind, and is a pretty big debate, especially among people that, it really affects them. It comes home to them, is that there's this debate about whether the actions in the official communications from the Marine Corps and from the Department of the Navy were timely or appropriate enough, because the discovery happened in 1982. But they didn't remove that contaminated water tank until 1987. So a whole 5 years in between.
Right.
And from what I understand, they immediately discovered it in 1982, but it did lead to subsequent investigations and subsequent research. And also because of the information they were sharing as quickly as they could, there have been hundreds of claims filed with the Department of the Navy, even before the PACT Act happened.
Right. That was before the PACT Act.
Yeah.
I would dare say there's been now thousands, if not tens of thousands, that are either filed or in the midst of being filed. So let's talk about who can do that, who can make a claim and who can file a claim as a result of this PACT Act. Diane kind of hit on this a little while ago, but it is a very broad brush. Anyone who was on Camp Lejeune, living or working on Camp Lejeune for 30 days between August 1st of 1953 and December 31st of 1987 can make a claim. And you may say, well, I didn't live there, but my dad lived there, or my mom worked there, and they're now dead. And oh my goodness, they died of lung cancer, or they died of breast cancer, or whatever the case may be. Those people can make claims as well. If you are a survivor of someone who was on the base for at least 30 days from 53 to 87, and if they developed certain forms of cancer, and there's a laundry list of those forms of cancer, but if they develop one of those issues, then you also can pursue a claim and on behalf of your loved one, a wrongful death claim.
Yeah, there's a good amount of cancers that are listed. What really stuck out to me whenever I was looking at the list, like really hit home for me, was the female infertility that's listed. Female infertility, or even just miscarriages.
Right.
I mean, that's enough to possibly have a claim.
Right. And there, like I said, there's a laundry list of cancers. We won't go through them all, but they're pretty common. Breast cancer, bladder cancer, leukemia, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, esophageal cancer, just multiple lists of what the Department of Veteran Affairs has acknowledged, that's key, has acknowledged to be forms of cancer that can be linked to that water contamination. What do you do to file a claim?
Yeah. So you've realized that you or a loved one has met those criteria. You've been on base or worked on base during that time for that amount of time, and you or a loved one has suffered from one of these illnesses that are listed.
So the important thing to know is if you're a veteran and maybe you're already receiving VA benefits, you're not excluded. You can still file a claim under the Camp Lejeune Justice Act. You just file that claim with the VA. Mm-hmm. If you're a veteran and you haven't filed a claim, once again, you file that claim under the VA. You can retain counsel or you can wait. Because this is very complicated and these claims are very complicated, and not because I'm a lawyer, but because they're complicated, I would highly recommend retaining counsel. I am not one of those attorneys that's advertising to take on the Camp Lejeune Justice Act. I will be happy to direct you in the right direction of someone I know and trust that's handling these claims. But, I'm a boutique firm, and I did not take on the staff to handle the tens of thousands of claims that would pour in if I started advertising for these things.
Yeah, but what if someone comes back and says, I'm just not one of the people that's going to sue?
Absolutely.
I'm not going to, people sue for everything these days, and I'm just not going to be a person that's just going to sue.
And, I get that all the time anyway in traffic accidents or workers' comp cases, I don't want to sue. And so there's nothing wrong with that. Most of us don't want to get involved in litigation. Most of us don't like it. It makes us uncomfortable. It would make me uncomfortable to do open heart surgery, but I hire an expert who does that and who knows when I need open heart surgery and when I don't. And I got to trust that expert. And so that's what you've got to do whenever you decide to file this claim. You've got to trust who you've hired. You've also got to realize that, your loved one, if it's not you yourself, then your loved one has suffered from a severe illness and has suffered and died prematurely, probably, from a severe illness from being exposed to these toxins. And so, there had to be medical fees involved because the VA would not have accepted that as a valid claim. So there had to be medical expenses. There had to be funeral expenses. There had to be most of the time, these kind of illnesses, any of these cancers we just mentioned, usually cripple a family financially. They're just not prepared for those kind of things. And so usually, even though we know that no amount of money can bring back your loved one or can bring back your good health, what the lawsuit does is it provides financial security to those service members who are still living and who are suffering with that. And then it also provides help for families who have lost a loved one, who maybe went through those financial problems while they were struggling. If they've passed away, they certainly had expenses that they struggled with during these illnesses.
How do you, what advice do you have for people to find the right fit or find the right lawyer? Because as we know, there are plenty of sharks out there.
You just have you have to ask around. And whenever I'm looking for a good doctor, let me use a better example, because I don't get to talk to many doctors about medical care. But if I'm looking for a good mechanic, I like to talk to people who know something about fixing a car. If I'm looking for, a good plumber, I like to ask around, what do people in that profession think about this person and their reputation? Now, yes, you can look at the Google reviews if you choose to. I'm not going to say how they can or cannot be skewed at times, but I like getting a recommendation from someone in the profession. And that to me usually leads me in the right direction.
And also what I have learned, again, with reading up on this and preparing for our podcast today, is that there have been some measures that have been put in place to prevent predatory practices.
Right.
Limiting lawyer fees and the types of fees that they can collect. So that is definitely also helpful. People are being looked out for, and hopefully the money that has been allotted from the PACT Act will reach the families. Right.
So the VFW has been vocal.
What does that stand for?
The Veterans of Foreign Wars.
There you go.
They have been very vocal about subsequent legislation to cap attorneys' fees on these things, because some have been proving to be predatory. A lot of times in a class action, what you're concerned about is the attorneys walk away with all the money and the victims walk away with pennies on the dollar. The American Legion has also encouraged Congress to provide some oversight to ensure that the veterans and their families are receiving fair consideration for their lawsuits. So there's obviously concern about predatory law firms and predatory practices, and hopefully there's going to be some safeguards put in place, because what we know is that Congress, just for the Camp Lejeune Justice Act, has set aside, my notes say, $6.7 billion for this act. And the goal here is that gets to the veterans and that gets to the service members who suffered this exposure to these PCEs and TCE chemicals and other toxins that were in the water, or those who lived on Camp Lejeune and then suffered later with health-related problems.
But that $6.7 billion isn't just to pay out lawsuits. I mean, that is also to provide care.
Yes. And the presumption now that if you have one of these conditions and the 30-day rule applied to you, that we're going to build that bridge with the presumption that this was the cause of your condition. The other thing we know as of today, which is 1 year approximately since the act has been passed, there have been tens of thousands of claims that have been filed, and certainly the advertising has worked. As relentless as it was, it has worked, but there haven't been any claims approved yet. So it still remains to be seen what the first or initial claims from the Camp Lejeune Justice Act are going to provide for veterans or their family. And so that's certainly something that we need to keep on the lookout for.
So if you are going to pursue a lawsuit under this Camp Lejeune Justice Act, how long do you have to do that?
Right. So this was part of the deal with the PACT Act and with the Camp Lejeune Justice Act, is that it has a very narrow window. It's called a statute of limitations. And that means that you have this amount of time to pursue your claim. And if you don't pursue it within that amount of time, then it is waived. It is extinguished. With the Camp Lejeune Justice Act, you have 2 years to pursue your claim, to get your claim brought forward.
And that was started August of 2022.
Right. I don't know the exact date when the act was passed, but that's why we had such a bombardment with advertising. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of people, once again, say, oh, there's the sharks trying to go after, the big money. But really and truly, what we know is that we've got a limited amount of time and a whole lot of work to do. And so there are law firms, reputable law firms that I respect and that I would hire if I had a claim that, had to hire on staff, had to expand their office or open up a branch office just to handle this kind of claims. Can you imagine what it would be like for thousands of claims to come in one day? That's going to stretch your staff. You might have a mutiny on your hands. So, yeah. So the statute of limitations is 2 years. I highly encourage anybody who even believes that they have a claim. If you're in my situation where I'm a child of a veteran who died of cancer, who did serve on Camp Lejeune. Now, can I build the bridge that his cancer was caused by his service at Camp Lejeune? I don't know. But what I have done is I've requested his military discharge papers, and we're waiting for those things, and we'll see. And, if I can build a claim, I certainly will, because my father suffered terribly with lung cancer and brain cancer before he died. And I've always believed that it was caused by something in the military. He served from Vietnam. He served in the Gulf, and he served in Southwest Asia, and he served at Camp Lejeune. So he was just, he was a military man. He served for 30 years. And I've always believed that something he was exposed to was caused his cancer. And but do I know that for a fact? No, because I was a child at the time and, never really had any type of recourse to look into it. So this has been encouraging, I hope, to not only to me, but to other families as well. But time is of the essence. And if you have the inkling, you need to start collecting your paperwork for your veteran and or for your father or your brother, your mother, and talk to somebody.
Yeah, especially if you're waiting for paperwork from the government. It's going to take time.
Right.
So do not wait.
Right. So hopefully we've given you some information. Diane, did you have anything else that you wanted to share? I know we've talked about deadlines and how to file a claim. Was there anything else that you thought was really important that we needed to bring up today, specifically about the Camp Lejeune Justice Act?
No, other than I will provide some resources in the show's notes. I'll also link both of our blogs to it as well in case you want to reference it later on. The blogs also will have resources. And if we can be of any help, we're not taking any cases, but I know that we're here to offer some advice, point you in the right direction, hopefully.
Yes, absolutely. Would be happy to do that. All right. Well, thank you so much. And we'll see you next time on Laughter in the Law,
where we talk about the law with a lighthearted twist.
And thanks for joining in for Flexner-Hauser Injury Law, Laughter in the Law,
where we talk about the law with a lighthearted twist.